The sun hung low over the barren dunes of the Wind Country, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the rippling sand. A dry, relentless wind howled through the canyon walls, carrying with it the faint scent of iron and dust. Naruto Uzumaki clenched his fists, his cerulean eyes narrowed against the stinging grid as he stood atop a jagged rock formation, his orange jumpsuit flapping wildly in the growing gale. Beside him, Gaara of the Sand remained eerily still, his gourd of sand shifting subtly at his back, his pale green eyes locked onto the horizon where the storm was brewing, a monstrous wall of churning dust and darkness that seemed to swallow the sky whole. "This isn't just any sandstorm," Gaara murmured, his voice barely audible over the wind. "There's chakra in it." Naruto gritted his teeth, his whisker-marked cheeks tightening. "You mean someone's controlling it?" Gaara gave a single nod, his fingers twitching slightly as the sand around his feet began to stir in response to his will. "Whoever it is, they're strong. The storm isn't natural, it's a technique, and it's getting closer." Naruto's mind raced. They had been sent to investigate strange disturbances near the border, rumors of missing patrols and unnatural weather patterns. Now, it was clear they had walked into a trap, or worse, an ambush. His fingers flexed, calling forth his signature Rasengan, the swirling sphere of chakra humming to life in his palm with a sharp, electric whine. He wasn't about to back down, not when innocent lives might be at stake. The storm hit with the force of a tidal wave. One moment, the air was thick with tension, the next, a deafening roar of wind and sand engulfed them. Visibility dropped to zero as the world became a swirling maelstrom of golden fury. Naruto barely had time to raise his arm to shield his face before he felt the first attack. A whip-like tendril of sand lashed out from the storm itself, aiming for his throat. He ducked just in time, the sand grazing his cheek with a sharp sting. "Gaara," he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. The Kazekage didn't need the warning. His sand surged forward in a protective dome around them, intercepting another brutal strike from the unseen enemy. The grains collided with a sound like grinding stone, and Gaara's eyes darkened with focus. "They're using the storm as cover," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos with practiced calm. "We need to draw them out." Naruto grinned, his competitive spirit flaring. "Leave that to me." With a burst of chakra, he vanished into the storm, his body moving faster than the wind itself. As he ran, he formed a shadow clone, the duplicate appearing in a puff of smoke beside him. Together, they weaved through the sand, dodging invisible strikes with instinctive precision. Then, with a synchronized leap, they hurled twin Rasengans into the heart of the storm. The spiraling spheres tore through the sand like drills, dispersing the wind in a shockwave that momentarily cleared the air, revealing their attacker. A figure cloaked in tattered robes stood atop a dune, their face obscured by a mask of hardened sand. Their arms were raised, fingers dancing like a puppeteer's as they commanded the storm itself. "So, you're the one causing all this trouble," Naruto yelled, skidding to a halt. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they clenched their fist, and the sand beneath Naruto's feet erupted like a geyser, swallowing him whole. Gaara's eyes flashed. "Naruto." But before the sand could crush him, a golden explosion of chakra erupted from within, the sheer force blasting the grains apart. Naruto emerged in his Nine Tails chakra mode, his body wreathed in flickering flames of energy, his eyes now slitted like a fox's. "Nice try," he growled, "but you're gonna have to do better than that." The masked enemy tilted their head, as if amused. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, they raised both hands, and the entire desert seemed to rise with them. The battle had only just begun. The desert wind howled like a vengeful spirit, whipping grains of sand into a furious storm that blotted out the sun. Naruto squinted through the stinging haze, his orange jacket flapping wildly as he braced against the gale. The air itself felt suffocating, thick with chakra-infused sand that dulled sound and blurred vision. Across the shifting dunes, Gaara stood motionless, his gourd of sand swirling protectively around him, his piercing gaze locked onto Naruto with cold intensity. "You won't win this time," Gaara said, his voice barely audible over the storm. His fingers twitched, and the sand beneath Naruto's feet erupted like a living thing, grasping at his ankles. Naruto barely had time to react, he flipped backward, kunai already in hand, slashing through the tendrils before they could ensnare him. His heart pounded, not just from exertion, but from the sheer weight of Gaara's killing intent. This wasn't just a fight, it was survival. Naruto landed in a crouch, his mind racing. He couldn't rely on brute force alone, Gaara's defenses were impenetrable without a plan. With a sharp exhale, he formed a shadow clone, the duplicate darting to the side in a feint while Naruto himself charged straight ahead. Gaara's sand surged forward, splitting into jagged spikes aimed at both targets. The clone vanished in a puff of smoke as the real Naruto twisted midair, avoiding the lethal strike by a hair's breadth. He wasn't fast enough yet, he needed more. Kurama's chakra flared within him, a familiar heat spreading through his veins. Red energy wreathed his body as he entered his partial nine tails form, his speed and strength multiplying in an instant. He blurred forward, landing a devastating kick to Gaara's midsection, only for the sand to absorb the impact at the last second, hardening into a shield. Gaara barely flinched, his expression unreadable as his sand retaliated, slamming into Naruto like a tidal wave and sending him skidding across the dunes. Blood trickled from Naruto's lip, but he grinned. "Not bad," he muttered, wiping his mouth. He could feel Kurama's growl reverberating in his mind. "Quit playing around, brat. He's not holding back." Naruto knew that. But he also knew Gaara, his pain, his isolation. He couldn't just fight him, he had to reach him. Across the battlefield, Gaara raised his hand, and the storm itself seemed to obey his command. The sand condensed into a monstrous claw, crashing down toward Naruto with crushing force. Naruto crossed his arms, channeling Kurama's chakra into a protective barrier just in time. The impact sent shockwaves through the earth, cracking the desert floor beneath them. The sheer power of the attack forced him to his knees, his muscles screaming in protest. But Naruto refused to stay down. With a roar, he pushed back, his chakra flaring brighter. The sand claw shattered, dispersing into the storm. Gaara's eyes widened slightly. Naruto was stronger than he remembered. "You don't have to do this," Naruto shouted over the wind. "I know what it's like to be alone, to think no one understands you. But you're not alone anymore." Gaara's grip on his sand tightened, his voice icy. Empty words. The storm around them intensified, the sand twisting into a colossal replica of the One Tail, its hollow eyes locking onto Naruto. Naruto clenched his fists. If words wouldn't work, he'd have to fight until Gaara had no choice but to listen. He reached deeper, drawing more of Kurama's chakra until his body burned with raw power. The ground beneath him cracked as he launched forward, meeting Gaara's monstrous construct head-on. Their clash sent shockwaves through the desert, sand and energy colliding in a deafening explosion. Naruto's fist connected with the beast's jaw, his knuckles splitting from the force, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Every strike, every movement was a message: "I won't give up on you." Gaara, for the first time, stepped back. His control wavered, the sand beast flickering. Naruto saw the opening and lunged, his hand outstretched, not to attack, but to reach. The storm raged on, but for a single, breathless moment, the world stood still. The desert roared like a living beast, swallowing the horizon in a churning tide of sand. Naruto squinted through the storm, his orange jacket snapping violently against the wind. Gaara stood ahead, his gourd of sand whirling around him like a second skin, his eyes cold and unreadable beneath the crimson streaks of his Kekkei Genkai. The air was thick with tension, the weight of their past battles pressing down on them both. Naruto clenched his fists, feeling the familiar surge of chakra ripple through his veins. He'd come too far to let this end in another stalemate. "This time, I'm ending it," he growled, his voice barely audible over the howling winds. Gaara's lips curled into a faint smirk, but there was something else there: doubt, hesitation. The sandstorm had silenced the world around them, leaving only the two of them standing at the edge of fate. Without warning, Gaara struck. The desert itself answered his call, surging forward in a tidal wave of crushing force. Naruto barely had time to react, darting sideways as the sand crashed where he'd stood moments before. He flipped backward, hands already weaving signs. Shadow Clone Jutsu. A dozen copies burst into existence, charging at Gaara from all sides. But the Kazekage didn't flinch. With a flick of his wrist, the sand morphed into a dozen spears, impaling the clones in midair. Naruto gritted his teeth. He needed to get closer. Channeling Kurama's chakra, his skin burned red as a cloak of energy enveloped him. He shot forward like a comet, sand exploding beneath his feet. Gaara's eyes widened slightly, he hadn't expected that speed. Before he could react, Naruto's fist connected with his jaw, sending him skidding back. But Gaara recovered instantly, his sand forming a shield that absorbed the next strike. "You've gotten stronger," Gaara admitted, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. "But so have I." His hands slammed together, and the ground beneath them trembled. The desert split open, an enormous hand of sand erupting from below, fingers curling around Naruto like a vice. He struggled, but the grip was relentless, squeezing the air from his lungs. Through the haze of pain, Naruto saw flashes of their past: Gaara as a lonely child, Just like him. The pain in his eyes when he realized he wasn't alone. The bond they'd forged. I won't let you fall back into darkness, Naruto roared. Kurama's chakra flared violently, shattering the sand prison in a shockwave of raw power. Gaara staggered, his defenses momentarily broken. Naruto didn't waste the opening. He lunged, his fist glowing with a spiraling mass of chakra. Rasengan. The impact sent Gaara hurtling backward, his sand barely cushioning the blow. He hit the ground hard, coughing as dust filled his lungs. For a moment, everything was still. Then, slowly, Gaara pushed himself up. His sand armor cracked, falling away in jagged pieces. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was quiet, almost resigned. Why? Do you keep fighting? Naruto didn't hesitate. Because I believe in you. You're not a monster, you never were. His words cut through the storm, sharper than any blade. Something in Gaara's gaze flickered. The sand around them stilled, the winds dying as if holding their breath. Then, with a shuddering exhale, Gaara lowered his hands. I don't want to fight anymore. The admission hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Naruto felt the tension drain from his body, relief flooding him. He extended a hand. Then let's end this. Gaara stared at it for a long moment before clasping it firmly. The storm around them dissipated, the desert falling silent once more. In the aftermath, the world shifted. The villages watched in awe as the two former enemies walked away side by side, a new era dawning in their wake. The battles had changed them, not just as warriors, but as men who understood the weight of their choices. And though the scars remained, so too did the promise of a future forged in trust. The sandstorm had silenced everything, but in its wake, something stronger than war had risen. Understanding. And that, Naruto knew, was the real victory.